any of that. Okay, so let's give him the benefit of the doubt and see what he does. Yeah.
All right. Well, talking about benefit of the doubt. I'm sorry again for our listeners. The rapid fire round is usually much more cut and tried. Yes, it's much more rapid. It's much more rapid and much more cut and tried than this. It's I fire a question, I get an answer, stupid or not stupid. None of these questions, by the way, have been answered stupidly, Jonathan. I want to say that.
Bigly.
Yeah. All right. Jeff Sessions, Attorney General. This one actually looks like it's going through.
Well, it very well may, but I will say, kind of like you and I were talking about before, if there was going to be a time where the Democratic minority in the Senate was going to take it to the limit, if you will, this is one of them. He's had a number of people, including Senator Scott of South Carolina, defend him. Nonetheless, there's a lot of garbage floating out there, not necessarily true, not necessarily untrue, but this is a big one. We definitely know where he's going to stand on enforcing Trump's proposed immigration policies. That's for sure.
Well, focusing on immigration, we've got Bob Lighthizer.
Oh my gosh, he's another name I've heard him before. I don't know a great deal about.
I did this. Hey, I did this, Jonathan. Yeah, I did.
Correct?
Yeah. Trade rep. You're.
Okay.
Please don't be dishonest, man. I mean, if you don't have your reputation, you don't have anything. Don't lie and tell us.
I'm not gonna.
Don't lie and tell us that you don't have your phone out in front of you or your.
No, I'm dead serious. I don't, because I would come up with something better than I've heard that name before.
I mean, you told me. All right, listen. I want to say this real quick for our readers. You told me before we started recording. You said that you went up to your attic, because you're in New Orleans, so you don't have a basement. You went up to the attic. You said you looked over the list of names. Hey, in the interest of full disclosure, I sent you the names, and you said you looked over the names real quick. It took about 10 minutes, which is not long enough for anybody to understand anything about any one of those names. And you said you called me back, and you said, "Look, I put the list up there. I don't have it in front of me. Just let's do this podcast because I want my visceral knee-jerk reaction." You're actually telling me that you knew knee-jerk that Lighthizer was the U.S. trade rep.
Yeah, but I don't know any more beyond that about it. Again, if I was going to cheat, I would cheat better.
Dude.
If you're going to lie. It's the only Twilight reference you'll probably ever hear in this podcast, but in one of the sequels of that sparkly vampire movie, she's trying to lie to get her way out of a jam, and Edward Cullen goes, "Lie better." That's where we're at here. I would definitely have something. Honestly, I'm pacing around.
Hey, Jonathan, your microphone's not working. You can't hear me snoring.
Oh.
You said Twilight? Dude, you want to talk about a melatonin? You know what works even better?
No.
Someone's saying the word Twilight Saga to me. All right, so please. But I am very impressed.
So the line remains the same.
I am very impressed. Dude, seriously, I'm not even joking. If I said James Lighthizer, people will go, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Are we saying Austrian names now? What are we doing? Like, is this a challenge?
The Twitter sparring matches with Salon for fun. Okay, so of course I've heard that game before.
Okay, hey, I'm there. No,
I'm what you call a womp.
This is a humorous,
It is not.
It's humorous. This is a humorous attempt to compliment you. No, I don't. This is legit. This is actually me complimenting you. You actually had
This is you complimenting me. This is deeply terrible.
You should wait till I insult you. So James Lighthizer.
Rapid with this rapid fire.
So James Lighthizer, his only.
It reminds me of the German national team football player, James Schweinsteiger. Like, the German team saying, "I love you, I want to go to bed with you," and it's angry.
He's the president of the Civil War Trust, battlefield president of the Civil War. All right. I'm going to finish this, okay? Whether you like it or not.
Sessions back to back. Come on, you playing that?
He's the president of the Civil War Trust Battlefield Preservation Organization. All right, that's who he is.
Put him on the heels of the Alabama senator. I mean, you planned that.
All right, dude, we've got like 18 of these left. All right, we're gonna have to bang through them. Okay.
Anyway, go on.
Okay. Director of National Intelligence, Dan Oates. Should there even be a Director of National Intelligence? Is there such a thing?
Well, that's kind of an oxymoron. I think the best Oates was the New York Giants offensive lineman, Bart Oates. I also like Hall & Oates, a great 80s pop duo. Anyway, let's move on.
All right. Well, that was actually... We should have done this at the same pace the whole time.
I concur.
Okay. Labor, Andrew Puzder.
Oh, yeah, he's another one of the congressmen, isn't he?
Yep.
Not Montana.
I said that because I was having to pull up his bio. No, I was wrong. He's actually the chief executive of CKE, which is that owns Hardee's and Carl's Jr. and all that.
Okay, I knew that. I knew it.
Yes, actually, I know. Yes. I actually know you knew that because we've actually talked about that before. He's the one that helped.
Because he's the one that started the hot girl eating the burger.
Yep. The hot girly girl commercials. Yep.
You and I have talked about that before. Let's leave that alone.
He's come out. He's come out against raising minimum wage.
Of course he has. I mean, but he's going to get his $20 million bonus. I mean, so, I've got mixed emotions on that. Yes, I've got my economic side, but I also look at some of these guys going, yeah, you're opposed to raising the minimum wage, but by God, if you're not going to get your upgrade to the Learjet next year, so, yeah, it's like George Bailey said in It's a Wonderful Life when he said, well, they're the ones that do all the living and dying around here. So,
right.
Anyway.
All right, let's move on. Tom Price, Health and Human Services.
Tom Price.
He's been in Congress. He opposes abortion rights, gay marriage, gun control, environmental regulations, and the ACA.
He is one of the most hardline conservative members, and I believe is it 1 or 99 that's the highest scale? I can't remember which. And the life's right. Whichever one it is, whether it's 1 or 99, he's got the highest on the scale. He's very hardline conservative. I guess that's a good thing if you're on the hard right. I'm, again, going to reserve judgment until he's actually performed the function.
Rick Perry. You and I are both people who love our alcohol. Is this someone who is an alcoholic? Is he just sputtering because he took too much of his antidepressants or not enough?
I don't know.
Is this like...
I don't know, but they tried to play it off like it was just him misspeaking that night. He's reaching for the note inside of his blazer and all that. I'm going, okay, you didn't act like that any other time. There was some sort of substance or witchcraft involved.
Do you have no? Hey, seriousness. We are a halfway respected media outlet. Do you actually believe that somebody sabotaged him that night when he would look like he was on heroin?
No, that's a little strong. I remember coming to my dad that night, who was in the Army during the 70s, so you can do the math of what all he saw. But we had gone back and forth on this, and we both agreed, because we had watched a lot of this process early on. He had never acted like that. He hasn't acted like that since, aside from, adopting some Malcolm X classes that he thought would, whatever. Anyway, he was on something.
All right, look, we have to move on.
He might not be an alcoholic or whatever. He might not be an addict, but that was the wrong time to decide to experiment.
So we have a black person appointed for housing and urban development. I think his name is Dr. Ben something. Dr. Ben, maybe Ben Carson. So we appoint the black guy to HUD and the woman to education, which we're going to get to in a minute. So do we just hey, good choice. The guy from Texas, the guy from Texas does energy. That works. He's got a lot of oil coming out of those freaking oil rigs there.
Sure, yeah. Then Dr. Carson gets, the guy from Detroit gets housing.
All right, so we've got, all right, sorry. So
he's going to be brilliant at whatever. I thought maybe Surgeon General, but I think Dr. Carson, you could put him in any capacity of the government, and he's such a bright mind. He wasn't just a top surgeon at one point. He was the number one neurosurgeon in the world.
All right, so all jokes, and our time running out aside, obviously Dr. Carson will probably be good at anything and everything that he ever does, just like he always has been.
Yes.
However,
he's a brave man.
However, the stereotypes being constantly criticized by the liberal media. Let's move on to one that kind of violates the stereotypes, which is Scott Pruitt. Kind of like John Bolton being appointed UN secretary when he didn't even believe in the UN.
Head of the EPA,
you got a guy that wants to do away with the EPA. Right.
Right. And the man that wants to do away with the EPA, that is being installed in charge of it. I actually think it's a good idea because you will reform the agency. The EPA was one of those things that was kind of brainchild by and signed into law by President Nixon. And I actually agree with it because we're dealing with the repercussions of not having an agency like the EPA today. Because General Motors thought it was okay to dump toxic corporate waste into the Flint River, and that's why we got kids with brain damage because of lead poisoning today. So he's not going to do away with that agency altogether. But maybe somebody wants to get in there and reform it and say, no, we're not going to tell farmers in California that they can't do what they will with the water they've got from their own wells, which that's what's going on because of a fish that, guess what, is not indigenous to the area.
All right, so
like that can be gotten rid of.
So, commerce is up next. And by the way, for our readers and listeners, the order that we're giving these in are the orders that they were signed by the president.
Right.
Commerce, Wilbur Ross, someone's been intricately connected with mostly information companies like IBM. Is this like a new paradigm, or is this just we're reaching?
I think it's an interesting pick because it's almost an intellectual pairing of sorts by the president with the need for IT security. So I think IBM is the closest thing to interstate commerce that this guy's ever come in touch with. Well, right, but at the same time, what is better personification of interstate commerce than the internet? So I think this may be one of those cases where Trump sees something that everybody else, or the majority of the others, don't, where I'm saying he's a great judge of talent. I actually think this is a good pick. I could be completely wrong. It's happened a few hundred times in my lifetime. But I think this is a good pick.
All right, so Elaine Chao, as our Secretary of Labor, do you I'm going to ask this. I want to focus on this one aspect real quick because she was born in Taiwan. Do you think? And no, I mean, she's an American citizen. She was born by she's the daughter of two American citizens. who are there for diplomatic reasons.
Right.
But do you think that this might be, and I just want to explore this because this could be the most interesting part of this podcast, even though we can't stay here long. Do you think this might possibly be like another middle finger to China, that they're appointing a Secretary of Labor who was born in Taiwan?
Interesting. This is one of those situations where we have put up with the status quo for so long that anything that seems in opposition to, of course, appears like a middle finger. In reality, Chiang Kai-shek, when he left the mainland, and I'm sure I've just butchered that pronunciation, I don't know, I've never heard a mainlander pronounce it, but when he left the mainland and went to Formosa, which is the original name of the island that Taiwan is based on, the Republic of China, that was the mainland Chinese government. So what President Trump is doing here is actually historically sound, in that was our original ally. We were in no way affiliated with the Reds in any country. As far as alliances go, Russia was an alliance out of their own necessity. I think this is actually a good move, and I don't think a deliberate way of sticking middle finger. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm overanalyzing it, and if it is, well, again, either way, we'll see how she does. But again, Formosa was where the original government fled to.
All right, so we have to move on to your very favorite state, South Carolina. And the absolute most logical choice of any cabinet secretary, which is the governor of South Carolina being sent to the UN as UN ambassador. Let's take her name out of it. Let's take the fact that she's a female out of it. Let's take the fact that she's a Republican out of it. Why in the hell would the governor of South Carolina be sent to the UN as our UN ambassador? Like, were we like taking
all those things out of it? Though,
like did Henry Kissinger did he not have like a recommendation letter for somebody?
Well, Dr. Kissinger has actually largely stayed out of this, but I would say why not? Regardless of what one thinks of her opinions, which I've got a mixed record on myself, she's a brilliant woman, of my own estimate, and in a way, she is kind of Trump-like. And I do think this, for him personally, even though he's president, yes, he still does have personal opinions, and it shocks people, but I think this is actually a logical pick for him. Do I like her for this position? That's not the question. You know, I think that she is rather fitting.
All right. Well, before we began this podcast, you were cracking jokes about this next appointee. Not that you were making fun of this appointee. You were making fun of his position, or his appointed position, which is Secretary of the Interior. We have for you, my insulting friend, Ryan Zinke.
Is he the one? Somebody was from Montana.
He's from Montana. Big Sky Country.
I knew, all right. I knew there was someone, you know.
Yep. We have a Montana. We have a Montana legend. He is a U.S. representative.
Congress. Yeah, I thought he was representative
for Montana, who is one of the few states, I think there are 3, that have an at-large congressional seat, which means
I believe that's correct.
He's actually elected like a senator. He's actually elected by the whole state, or like a governor.
What, Maine's one of them, right?
I think it's Maine. I think it's the same states that divide their presidential electoral votes. I think it's Maine, Nebraska, and Montana.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to say that was all right. Anyway,
at any rate, he is an at-large representative, which means he's not just a congressman. He is a congressman elected by the entire state. and he has been picked for Secretary of the Interior. Now, I'm going to give you two options. You can pretend to be smart and tell me why he was the one picked, or you can yield and you can say, I'm not sure why they would pick this particular person. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tilt my cards. It's not because I know anything about this guy. I don't. I have not researched him. There's one reason why you would pick, and this is a good reason. It's one reason why you would pick the at-large.
The largest wildlife preserve. I don't know. It's just a guess.
Well, you're close. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and give that to you. I'll give you the victory. You're right. Okay, because Montana has more. Because Montana has more federally protected land than any other state.
Okay, that was just a wild guess, but I was going to say my response.
Good job, though. No joke. Good job.
Beautiful shots.
Yeah.
Thank you, but it was a guess.
Yeah. That's it. It's because Montana has more federally protected land than any other state in the country.
Really? I would have guessed that would have been Arizona. I know there's a chunk there, but
I think
Arizona and Nevada.
I say that I think it might be New Mexico or Utah, but those are just like
it's the Copper State, correct? Capitals and Billings.
Do what?
The Copper State, correct? Capitals and Billings.
Yeah, Billings is the capital of Montana.
Never been there. Always wanted to. Sister Brooke loved it.
Can we please move on?
It's gorgeous.
All right.
Yeah, let's go.
Education.
Montana has never gotten this much time in a podcast ever.
Right. The wife of the Amway empire is the new education secretary, Betsy DeVos. My wife is a kindergarten school teacher. In the interest of full disclosure.
That's Mrs. McMahon we're talking about here, secretary.
Yep.
Okay. All right. And this is not intended to be a joke. Clear this up for me. Is she related to the WWE guy?
No, that's Linda McMahon. We're getting to her next.
Oh my God. Well, maybe we should go ahead and do that because I know we're fresh out of time, and I don't know much about her, and I don't want to say anything,
All right, well, let's just deal with the issue. She's been a lobbyist on behalf of charter schools and voucher program.
Yeah, the only people against school vouchers are the people in favor of bigger government, because I always love the argument I get, oh, what if bad schools fail? Oh, well, welcome to the real world where if you suck at your job, your business can crumble. Let a bad school fail. Your kids go to a better one.
All right, Linda McMahon.
I know this poor woman may be perfectly capable and suited for the job, but I'm just having a problem separating her from the man who created the XFL. Right, let's not do this. Let's move on.
All right, so we've only got one that's actually not on the senior staff left. When I said 27, we have several, like the chief of staff and stuff like that. We're talking about cabinet secretaries right now. Right. So the only one we really have left is the Secretary of Agriculture. I mean, we have the head of the VA, who has an office in the West Wing, but he's not really a cabinet.
Hiring.
Right. But Sonny Perdue.
No, but it's a big one.
Yeah, Sonny Perdue is the nomination for Secretary of Agriculture. This guy has been he was a governor of Georgia for 8 years.
Okay, I saw that on the highway signs. The only reason that name was familiar, I'm being honest here, I don't know anything more about it than that. Because of Atlanta, I don't really pay attention to Georgia.
Honest and direct. Okay, so do we have time to do the clips from Sean Spicer and Kellyanne Conway, or should we skip straight to the end of this company?
At this point, we can flip that off at the end if we want. If we've lost anybody now, then, well,
I'll tell you what, because we have the new company, and if any of our listeners are listening to this part of this.
Yes, thank you for Eddie Maddock, and Eddie Maddock III, actually, of Poughkeepsie, New York, and Overwatch Productions. for signing on to edit our podcast from an audio technology perspective, not content. But anyway, there's our plug, and no, they're not sponsors. They're just really good friends.
All right.
So we'll go ahead and do these.
All right, cool. So you want to go ahead and do the clips from Sean Spicer and Kellyanne?
Why not?
All right, let's do it. So what we have left is now that we've done the rapid fire round and gone through 23 or so of the 27. Right? Yeah. So we've done the cabinet, probably more than they'd like to do us. And now we want to talk just from...
I don't want to be done by anybody.
I'm a happily...
Italian or otherwise.
I'm a happily married man. Very, very happily.
The Italians mean that a little differently, but which is the Thanksgiving pizza. We don't want nobody at mine station to get hurt.
All right, Jonathan, this podcast has gone on long enough. Shut up. All right, so we're gonna do the next two little picks or pieces that we're gonna listen to. We're gonna talk about the way the press is being treated by the Trump White House. We've talked about the cabinet picks and the way that Trump is treating the federal government with what he is sending to the Senate for approval. Now we're going to talk briefly about the way he's treating the press. This is his press secretary, Sean Spicer.
Good evening. Thank you guys for coming. I know our first official press briefing is going to be on Monday, but I wanted to give you a few updates on the president's activities. But before I get to the news of the day, I think I'd like to discuss a little bit of the coverage of the past 24 hours. Yesterday, at a time when our nation and the world was watching the peaceful transition of power, and as the president said, the transition and the balance of power from Washington to the citizens of the United States, some members of the media were engaged in deliberately false reporting. For all the talk about the proper use of Twitter, two instances yesterday stand out. One was a particularly egregious example in which a reporter falsely tweeted out that the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. had been removed from the Oval Office. After it was pointed out that this was just plain wrong, the reporter casually reported and tweeted out and tried to claim that a Secret Service agent must have just been standing in front of it. This was irresponsible and reckless. Secondly, photographs of the inaugural proceedings were intentionally framed in a way, in one particular tweet, to minimize the enormous support that had gathered on the National Mall. This was the first time in our nation's history that floor coverings have been used to protect the grass in the mall. That had the effect of highlighting any areas where people were not standing, while in years past, the grass eliminated this visual. This was also the first time that fencing and magnetometers went as far back on the wall, preventing hundreds of thousands of people from being able to access the mall as quickly as they had in inaugurations past. Inaccurate numbers involving crowd size.
So you have Sean Spicer, the president's press secretary, in the first press conference, which I love. He starts out by saying, the first press conference is going to be at a later date, but I just wanted to come out to beat up on the media for a second. Like, is this irregardless of whether or not what he said is true, which I don't have evidence that it isn't, so I will accept that what he said is true. Is this the way for a press secretary to behave? Should we even have a press secretary? Do we owe the press, i.e. us, do we owe them this conversation at all?
We owe the American people the rights afforded them specifically. I know there's 27 all in all, but the rights specifically afforded them in the Bill of Rights. And one of those is, yes, freedom of the press. There is no obligation cited by the Founding Fathers to, yes, ye shall have a special occasion on this and that, how many times. So we don't owe the media the expletive deleted, okay? But that said, I think on the other side of the coin here, like you know, we're talking about, I believe it was before the podcast, confidence is how little you react when falsely accused. I think somebody got a little, yes, correct the media's record, but the manner in which he was so emphatic about Dr. King's statue and then about the National Mall. Let's face it, millions of people support both President Obama and President Trump. Again, President Obama's been president for 8 years. Relax. Let it breathe. Let it grow. As far as the Dr. King statue goes, that's amateur journalism. Whoever tweeted that back, I wouldn't have responded to that. But I do understand the adversarial nature of the media. I really do.
All right. Speaking of adversarial, let's listen to Kellyanne Conway, who you and I both suggested should possibly be the press secretary, if there's going to be one. This is her with Chuck Todd, the inheritor of the podium of Meet the Press.
So I'm curious why President Trump chose yesterday to send out his press secretary to essentially litigate a provable falsehood when it comes to a small and petty thing like inaugural crowd size. I guess my question to you is, why do that?
Chuck, the president did many things yesterday and the day before that are very meaningful to America. He signed executive orders to stop Obamacare and all of its problems. Millions of people have lost their insurance, their doctors, their plans. So that stops right now. He's going to replace it with something much more free market and patient-centric in nature. And on this matter of crowd size, for me, I think the most quantifiable points of interest for Americans should be what just happened a few months ago that brought him here, the 31 of 50 states he won, the 2,600 counties, the 200 counties that went for President Obama that now went to President Trump, and the fact that 29, 30 million women voted for Donald Trump for president. They should be respected. Somebody should cover their voices as well. I'm about things that are quantifiable and important. I don't think ultimately presidents are judged by crowd sizes at their inauguration. I think they're judged by their accomplishments. And we know that President Obama and his accomplishments, so there's a lot of unfinished business there. And on this matter of crowd size, I think it is a symbol for the unfair and incomplete treatment that this president often receives. I'm very heartened to see Nielsen just came out with the ratings, 31 million people watching the inauguration. President Obama had 20.5 million watching his second inauguration 4 short years ago. So we know people are also watching the inauguration on different screens and in different modes, and that there was a prediction of a downpour of rain. I think that deterred many people from coming. But no question, there were hundreds of thousands of people out on the mall.
All right, Kellyanne, let me stop you here because you make a very reasonable and rational case for why crowd sizes don't matter. Then explain. You did not answer the question. Why did the president send out his press secretary, who's not just the spokesperson for Donald Trump? He also serves as the spokesperson for all of America at times. He speaks for all of the country at times. Why put him out there for the very first time in front of that podium to utter a provable falsehood? It's a small thing, but the first time he confronts the public, it's a falsehood?
Chuck, if we're going to keep referring to our press secretary in those types of terms, I think that we're going to have to rethink our relationship here. I want to have a great open relationship with our press, but look what happened the day before, talking about falsehoods. We allowed the press to come into the Oval Office and witness President Trump signing executive orders. And of course, the Senate had just confirmed General Mattis and General Kelly to their 2 posts, and we allow the press in.
So Kellyanne makes a good point about possibly rethinking the relationship that the Trump administration is going to have with the press. Well, we're the press.
It's already been rethought. Okay, she's being kind by referring to it in the future tense. Still thought here. Okay. He made a point there. I know he didn't say this, but he was saying, look, the press secretary isn't just President Trump's lapdog. Well, no, I didn't hear anybody at CNN. That's where he worked, right, Mr. Todd?
Yeah. Well, no, he works for NBC. He's Meet the Press.
Okay, NBC. Excuse me. My apologies. NBC. I didn't hear any of them, and maybe they did, but I didn't hear them squalling about the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, meeting with former President Clinton during the campaign, during an open investigation that, that's not Hillary Clinton's personal laptop. Now, I get it. She wasn't president at the time, but obviously that was an obscene gesture. So that's a ridiculous point for him to keep honing in on, okay? If you're going to call it, call for all those strikes, okay? And that's where we're at with Monse. But all in all, she makes a number of good points. I refer back to let's not overreact, because I didn't even think of the weather argument. The weather was terrible there. But Gabriel, I'll ask you this, and I've never asked you this before, okay? How many times, I'm a fan of President Nixon, how many times have I made arguments to you about his distinct presidency over 5.5 years of him being president, based upon the crowd sizes?
I don't have any freaking clue what the crowd sizes were. I've never discussed that with you at all. And you've read every book ever written about or by Nixon, and I've read almost every book written about or by Nixon. I've never heard Nixon or read about Nixon talking about the crowd sizes himself.
This is a very modern thing, It's like when people talk about their legacy. You don't get to decide your legacy. People after you decide that, okay? This whole thing of, so-and-so's legacy, somebody after you will decide that, I agree with what she said before the end where you cut it there, where she said, let's see what happens after he gets power, basically. Let's go from that. I don't, frankly, give a damn about if 11 people were there or 800,000 were there. I'd be glad if, 20 showed up to hear me speak. This is all the measurement of phallic parts to me.
Speaking of legacy, one of the greatest, when I say greatest, I mean most important.
Right, that's a word that classically speaking refers to renown.
Right.
Not goodness.
Decisions, impacts that a president makes is the appointment of a Supreme Court justice for life. And we could spend an entire podcast discussing whether or not Supreme Court justices should be appointed for life. But that,
I think they personally need term limits, but we'll go on.
But that being the case currently, we have an appointment, Neil Gorsuch, to the Supreme Court. I assume even if the Democrats give him a hard time, the Republicans will end up changing the filibuster rule, which perhaps they should do anyway. Again, another podcast. But I've done a little bit of research. When I say a little bit, I mean enough to have this conversation. And so my in-mixed company is normally something that's a cultural discussion or a book I'm reading. This is actually a book I'm not reading. It's a book I've read twice. It's David Barton's Original Intent. And it analyzes the personal conversations that the Founding Fathers had with each other that affect or should affect, potentially, judicial decisions today. In other words, an analysis of the law as what did the Founding Fathers mean when they wrote this? Right. And the only question you ask when a law a law is called into question or a situation is examined is, well, what would the Founding Fathers have thought about this? Well, we have lost the true king of original intent on the Supreme Court, and his and Scalia's position is being filled potentially by Neil Gorsuch. So my cocktail discussions, my in-mixed company are focused 100% on this Supreme Court nominee, but more importantly, about the potential for us to return, not to pro-choice or pro-life, pro-gay marriage, anti-gay marriage. That's not, no. The issue is not the point. The system is the point. That's the point. The point is the system. And the system...
If I may stop you and we can edit this out if you want. I texted you earlier incorrectly. His last name is Gurluch, Gorlich. And I believe that I texted you a misspelling. My apologies. Continue.
No, that's fine. I'm looking at his name on the New York Times right now. But Gorse is someone who has consistently agreed with that interpretation of the Constitution, and that is a great comfort to me. And I would challenge and encourage anyone to disagree or give me a reason not to follow that train of thought. I don't ask someone what their beliefs are as far as gay marriage or abortion.
First, they should read the Constitution.
I just say exactly, read the Constitution. All right, so what's your in mixed company?
Honestly, I thought of this earlier before the podcast, we were talking about boring people and going on for too long. It's a quote from Montesquieu where he said, artists have the perversity of, whereas some people bore people for a limited frame of time, artists make a lifetime, even after they're dead, of boring people. And that's why I've always sought to cut this short. It's like I told my sister a couple of weekends ago when I was at her home and she wanted me to stay the night. And I said, Tony, you know how I've always been. I would rather have people irritated with me for leaving the party too soon than for them saying that I stayed far too long. So with that, it's a quote from Montesquieu.
Well, this has been the Mod State podcast for the 1st of February. And my friend, my boss, my managing editor, and someone with whom I share a collegial and friendly relationship, as well as a deep disdain for not thinking hard enough to bring a contribution to the end of this podcast. The In-Mix Company.
Time off. We went on too long. It's like, the second half of Stairway to Heaven or Bohemian Rhapsody. It's like, oh my God. I call it Coldplay syndrome. God bless it, Chris Martin can't end a song. Jesus. You're always crying. But anyway, whatever.
Well, for all of our listeners, I'd
rather have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy.
For all of our listeners, we thank you and say, The Mod State Podcast is sponsored by Verizon Wireless. Good night.